Welcome back to another episode of Holy Smokes, Cigars and Spirituality. I'm Christian A. Smith, the heretic and the host. And this is episode 6 of season 3. We're making more disruptive faith-based content for the everyday person. Shout out to everybody in our Patreon community who's here with us live right now. And to those of you listening on the podcast platforms and our friends over at FAM Radio. We're here for one of the most anticipated topics of this season. Should Black people be Christians? Should Black people be Christians? And today we're joined by one of my dearest friends on the planet, Stephen J. Thurston II. Stephen, say hello to the people. We're so glad to have you, man.
I'm glad to be here on with my favorite uncircumcised Philistine friend, Christian Smith. It's always a pleasure to connect with this community. Let's get it in today.
Oh, so if you don't know about my relationship with Stephen, he makes fun of me often. Actually, every time I see him, he ridicules me. But I'm working through the trauma that comes along with this friendship. So y'all just pray for me. But we're glad to have Stephen. I know he has some excellent content for us today. And we have a number of our other cast members. This is an exciting time in the season because we got people showing up that we don't get to see as frequently. Because, you know, everybody here has a very important career and businesses and other endeavors. So we're glad to see the people who are here, and we're going to introduce them in just a second. So here at Holy Smokes, you know what we like to do? Make sure everybody understands the ground rules, or should I say the ground rule, because we only have one. And that one rule at Holy Smokes is that we respect each other's lived experiences.
Say it one more time.
One more time. The one rule at Holy Smokes is that we respect each other's lived experiences.
One more time.
One more time? Okay. All right. One more time.
For the Kingmaker.
For the Kingmaker. He's not here today, so for the Kingmaker. The one rule at Holy Smokes is that we respect each other's lived experiences, because a lot of times when people start having conversations about life, faith, and theology, the tendency is to lift up our doctrine or our theory over an actual experience that somebody has lived. So we challenge people here, when you encounter somebody who has a lived experience that contradicts your doctrine or your theory, you take that as an opportunity to learn from what that person has lived. And that one rule is based in Greatest Commandment Theology, which is a strand of theology that I curated over my past few years of ministry. It says simply this: your love for God is displayed through how you love your neighbor, which is an extension of how you love yourself. Therefore, you can't fully love God if you don't love your neighbor, and you can't fully love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. That's rooted in what Jesus says in Matthew 22, beginning around verse 34. So that's the one rule. It's rooted in Greatest Commandment Theology. Also, as you know, we have brilliant people here, Stephen being one of them. And I'm looking forward to hopefully hitting Stephen today, because we have something called the dollar jar. So that when people use an academic word on this show and they don't define it, they're going to get this alarm right here. Yes, because we want to make sure that we keep this content accessible to the everyday person. Because I love conversations about theology, but I don't think you have to limit conversations about theology with people who work in the academy, people who have PhDs and Masters of Divinity. I believe we're all theologians because we all like to talk about God and spirituality. So we want to make sure we keep it accessible. So that's why we have the dollar jar. At the same time, we have some very profound people on here who sometimes have mic drop moments. So if somebody does have a mic drop moment, our producers are going to hit you with this. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we should definitely have some of those today. And then pre-show, we already had this one a few times because everybody's just edgy today for some reason. but we tend to take shots at each other and other people sometimes. So if somebody takes a shot at somebody, then you're going to get this alarm. Yes, we already heard that one earlier. We have a little feud going on here between the AKAs and the Deltas. I didn't start it. I'm just standing on the sideline. Karima, Akila, that's between you and Pamela.
It ain't no fight. It ain't no fight. It ain't no fight.
Oh, okay.
We know what it is.
All right. Because Karima, I love you for real, but like I gotta back Pam on this one. So
you can have peace in your home, bro. I get it.
Yeah. Cody, we not fighting, okay? If they get into a fight, we standing on the sideline. We not getting into that. All right. And then, of course, we have Grayson the pundit here. He's already hit us with about 2 or 3 puns pre-show. So if we hear a pun from Grayson or anybody else, you're going to get this alarm right here. All right. Lovely. So that's what we're doing today. Let's get into some introductions as we go into this conversation about should Black people be Christians. And today for our introductions, I'm going to ask everybody, tell us, what are you smoking or drinking? And then also answer this question: when did you first encounter the idea that maybe Black people shouldn't practice Christianity? That's what I want you to answer today in your introduction. I'll go first. Again, I'm Christian. I'm the host of Heretic. I'm having a Cafe Royale in honor of the Kingmaker. I'm also smoking one of my favorite sticks, the Cuban sandwich. So that's what I'm having today. I first encountered the idea that maybe Black people shouldn't be Christians when I watched the movie Malcolm X, directed by Spike Lee with Denzel Washington. So in that film, that was my first encounter to that magnitude of Malcolm X's work. And it just struck me like, dang, he like really doesn't like Christians, and that's who I am. Like, he's talking bad about MLK. Like, you can't talk bad about Martin Luther King. But that was my first encounter, and it has definitely evolved since then. So I want to start off going back to Steve. Steve, if you'll tell us, what are you smoking and or drinking, if anything? And then when did you first encounter the notion that maybe Black people shouldn't be Christian?
Pure water, alkaline water. And I've got a Gurkha Reserve, aged 12 years. I would say my first encounter Christian, it would be similar to yours, of course, growing up here in Chicago and having a relationship with the Nation of Islam. Minister Farrakhan and my father, good friends. So just being around that environment, having eyes open to other people's religious experiences and expressions caused me to raise some questions and do some research and do some digging at a young age. Oh,
lovely. So this is going to be even better. You have connections with the Nation of Islam, which I'm sure will come up at some point. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Let's kick it over to Myron the Mystic. Myron, introduce yourself and tell us when you first encountered the idea that Black people maybe shouldn't be Christians.
So I'm drinking coffee, just regular coffee. There's nothing in this. I'm inside, so I'm not smoking, but I'm just going to show you cigars that I have in my humidor that I would be smoking if I was outside. So this is a St. Louis Ray. I don't know where I got this from, but it looks like an interesting stick, so I would be smoking that. Let's see, the idea that Black people shouldn't be, I know specifically when. So I started preaching when I was 8 years old. And for Christmas that year, after I started preaching all across the city of New Orleans, my cousin gave me the book From the Browder Files by Anthony Browder, which is a book about Black experience in Egyptology. And in that book, Anthony Browder exposes Christianity as the white man's religion. And so that was when I was first exposed to the idea that maybe I shouldn't be a Christian.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Let's kick it over to Grayson the pundit. Introduce yourself, sir, and tell us, when did you first encounter the idea that maybe Black people shouldn't be Christians?
Hey, everyone. I'm Grayson Hester, the pundit, pronouns he, him, his. I was drinking some coffee, but I drained it. So all I'm drinking now is, as the Kingmaker says, the Lord's vodka, water. or Jesus gin. How about that? I prefer gin anyways. So just drinking some water. It's not pure alkaline water. I'm trying to be like Steven, but I'm not quite to that level yet. So it's just impure tap water from whatever reservoir Atlanta's stealing from Tennessee. So the first time that I remember that I encountered the idea that maybe Black people shouldn't be Christians, and this will come as no surprise to anybody, was my James Baldwin class, particularly in The Fire Next Time. So that's, I think, my favorite of his essays, and he details his meeting Elijah Muhammad in the 60s, and his conversations with Elijah Muhammad, of course, and if I get the details wrong, please correct me, founder of Nation of Islam, at least like the head of, and in that conversation goes through some of what Muhammad's Nation of Islam theology was, and sort of the explanation, his explanation for why white people exist and where they come from. And then James Baldwin himself was Christian, and was a pastor, but then having seen the behind the scenes, saw it for what he deemed as the theater that it was. So he wasn't Christian for all of his life. And then towards the end of his career in the 80s, called I think like the three terrors of Europe or something like that. And it was color, commerce, and Christianity. So he was of the not Christian ilk of Elijah Muhammad and Nation of Islam, but was not nearly as anger driven or violent in the extent of his beliefs.
All right. Awesome. The James Baldwin class for Grayson. And for those that don't know, our community here is pretty diverse. So we have a good mixture of people of different races and ethnicities. So even right now with our Patreon live audience, we see some exchange going on in the comments. Because like Josh Carpenter, one of our Patreon members, and also who was a special guest on the episode I'll Sleep When I'm Dead from earlier this season, said that he was taught in his education to be afraid of Malcolm X, which is really unfortunate. He said the more that he learned about him, the less afraid of him he becomes. So that's good that people are, expanding their education around these topics, particularly about who Malcolm X was, because he really wasn't somebody to be afraid of, unless you were trying to uphold the standards of white supremacy, so on and so forth. So he's scared in that regard, if you're committed to that. But we'll keep going. I'm sure we'll get into that. Let's kick it over. We got the ladies with us for the second consecutive show. I'm excited. Let's start with Nikki, the anchor. Introduce yourself and tell us when you first encountered the notion that maybe Black people shouldn't be Christians.
Hey, everybody. I'm Nikki Hardman. I am finishing up my cup of coffee, and I'm actually drinking a green smoothie. So that's what I'm nursing this morning. Not smoking anything because it is crazy cold outside. So I'm not smoking inside. And so the first time that I encountered this actually was in preparation for this program. This was a new idea for me. And seeing Josh's comments, I didn't put it together, but it probably is in large part because I don't know that I was taught to be afraid of Malcolm X, but I was taught that Malcolm X was very extreme. And so in my moderate upbringing, that wasn't a part of anything that I learned. And it's probably still a hole in my own education. So I've got my homework to do, but I look forward to this conversation today. I look forward to hearing about this and just engaging.
Thank you, Nikki. I think it's so unfortunate that our education system and our political system deems those who require human dignity as extreme.
Absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
Why is that extreme? I don't understand why, you're a radical leftist if you think like people deserve health care, like and a living wage, but
be treated like humans.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Last introduction of the day, we got Karima the Truth. Introduce yourself, ma'am.
Hey, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Karima Akila, and around these parts, they know me as The Truth. I am sipping on some coffee, my favorite Café du Monde. And the very first time that I encountered the idea that Black folks shouldn't be Christian, I was heckled. I grew up in a Black Baptist church. Everyone I knew that was Black loved Jesus. You know, my grandmama had the Black Trinity on her wall. You know what I'm saying? It was Jesus, it was JFK, and it was Martin Luther King. And I did not know a Black person that did not love Jesus. I saw my brothers and sisters on the corner selling the bean pies and final calls and such. But I thought that was something other. So here then I get to Morgan State University, an HBCU, the national treasure that it is. And I walk on the campus as a freshman, and I strike up this conversation about Christianity. And, you know, me coming from my, evangelical / Black Baptist background, start telling people that they're going straight to hell if they don't believe in Jesus. And my God, it's a miracle I wasn't stoned to death on the campus. And so that was the first time that I encountered Black folk, young Black folk, who thought that I was crazy because I did believe in Jesus. And then as I continued in courses there, I found even some professors. I remember one course in particular, he really challenged my Christian faith. And so that was the first, but not the last encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably most of the Black people who are here today have encountered that notion multiple times in multiple spaces, especially since we've entered the age of information, and it's so much information that's so easily accessible. I would imagine most of us have. So thank you for sharing that, Karima. All right, so you can see this conversation is going to be great today. Before we move deeper into the conversation, though, we're going to have the cigar tip today. And for those of you who don't know, you've already heard from Tiger Gibson for the cigar tip. You've heard from Kurt Vance, the Kingmaker. You've heard from Myron the Mystic. Today, you're going to get more of me. You're going to get the Heretics Humidor. Let's go. All right, people, welcome to the Heretics Humidor. I have a quick tip for you today, and it's actually about, how we care for our cutter, and it's a sanitary issue. Because one thing that a lot of people don't consider is, you have your cutter for your cigar, and you can do a straight cut, you can do a V cut. My favorite is a V cut. That's what I have right here. But you have to be careful about sharing your cutter, and I'll tell you why. Sometimes people will cut their cigar, right? So let's say I'm cutting my cigar right here, and they cut it. Sometimes people will put their mouth on it and then realize it's not cut exactly the way they want it, and they'll go back and recut it. Well, now whatever was in your mouth is now on the cutter. And if you're sharing cutters, particularly in the midst of a pandemic, a respiratory pandemic, that could be an issue. So you got to be careful who you're sharing your stuff with. For all of you weed smokers, if you pass them the blunt, that means anybody that got COVID, now you putting your mouth on the same blunt they had their mouth on. Just keep that in mind if you're sharing. We don't share cigars, so that's not a concern for cigar smokers. But it's very easy. How do you clean your cutter? This is very important for people to consider. Is alcohol and a cotton swab. That's it. Alcohol and a cotton swab. Get in there, clean it off, and you're good to go. And then also, if you want to clean it even further, you can use graphite lubricant. But the alcohol and the cotton swab will get you where you need to be if it's just about, being clean and not passing along germs. So that is the Heretics Humidor for the day. Thanks for being here. All right. Thank y'all for bearing with me on the Heretics Humidor today. I hope I helped somebody.
That was a good man. I enjoyed that. I'd like to keep my cutter clean.
Yeah. I thought that would be helpful. It's a pandemic. And cutters are one of the things that like people pass around. Here, you want to use my cutter? You want to use my cutter? You want, so we got to be careful about that because
I appreciate that wonderful cashmere turtleneck you got on.
I knew I wasn't going to make it out of here without somebody bringing that up.
It's coming to a close presentation near you, Myron.
Oh, good. I'm going to tell along to get one.
I knew that was going to happen. All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. We got Stephen Thurston here. We're talking about should Black people be Christians? And I just want to see where this conversation goes, and we're going to let Stephen lead us off. So, Steve, what's your take on this topic? Like, should Black folk be Christians? Why? Should they not be Christians? Why not? Tell us what your thoughts are, Steve.
Man, thank you again for inviting me into the conversation. And I am pro Black people deciding to follow the path of Jesus, because I'm clear on that, following Jesus, because there's a difference between Christianity and some of the stuff that takes place in America concerning Christianity and the conflation between the two. But I think it's a challenge, especially we were talking about a pre-show, Black Hebrew Israelites, and you've got all of these individuals coming to the scene with all of their dogma, all of their interpretations of history. And I think it's important that we recognize that white European scholars have falsely propagated the identification of Christianity with Europe and not Africa in their interpretations of things. And I want to challenge Black people, especially, to stop perpetuating the idea of Christianity as the white man's religion, because Africans were participants in the initiation of the Christian faith. Slaves were not just powerless and automatically converted to Christianity. That thought process is dangerous. It's all just a revisionist history. And it can't continue to dominate our historical and cultural imagination, because many of these stories are incomplete, they're false, and by continuing to perpetuate them, we're complicit in the centuries-old goal of whitening Christianity and history, and therefore we collectively suppress Blackness, silence our ancestors, and enable oppressive groups to dominate the historical narrative.
Well, we want to thank you all for joining us. That wraps up today's episode of.
Well, bam. That's a wrap right there. Okay.
Right.
Offering plate. We done.
Yep. That's it. We're done here. We'll see y'all next time. I don't know what the episode is going to be, but it doesn't matter.
I mean, I've got more.
We'll bring Steve back for the next one too, because he makes this really easy. Yeah, you brought it right there. You had a lot of valid points to make. Karima, do you have any thoughts on this topic, particularly with what Steven just shared?
I mean, I really don't want to have to come behind that, but since you did it to me like that, all right. God. Yes, and yes. Yes, and yes to all of that. The most important part that I would love to have another episode on to really expand further would be the historical and the genesis, if you will, of the Christian faith on the continent of Africa. And that is something that needs to be taught, and it needs to be made more readily available. There's a lot that we have to unlearn and undo in order to see the place of people of color in the story of Christianity. Yeah, that's all I got for that right there. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Like that's a whole book.
I totally agree. Steve brought up the Hebrew Israelites, and I get in trouble for this, particularly with like Black people who are trying to embrace their wokeness. And what I find is that a lot of times when you think about what white supremacy is not limited to white people. And I believe that some Black people are white supremacists unknowingly, unwittingly, they're white supremacists, because to give white people credit for the origin of a faith tradition that began in the northeastern region of Africa and went deeper into sub-Saharan Africa
Yes.
before it went north to Rome.
Yes.
To give white people credit for the origins of that faith tradition, to me, is the pinnacle of white supremacy. Why are we giving white people so much damn credit for Christianity, right? And I feel like people who operate like that are actually white supremacists in disguise. So that's just my thought. Steve, you look like you got something to say right there.
Yeah, man, because it's in divorcing North Africans from the African diaspora and artificially dividing North Africa from sub-Saharan Africa that you erase the larger Black community's connection to Christianity. The New Testament, in fact, was established as a canon in 397 CE in Africa at the Synod of Carthage. Significant institutional, theological, and doctrinal aspects of Christianity emerge out of the continent of Africa. Josh just talked about it in his comments about the church fathers. I mean, you got the basic theological concepts of vocabulary derived from Africans such as Tertullian, born in Carthage. I need somebody to get a map. Modern day Tunisia. You got Athanasius, born in Egypt. You got Augustine, born in Numidia, which is modern day Algeria. All of that is on the continent of Africa. And so we have to do that historical search and stop stopping at the transatlantic slave trade and go back further to the origins of this thing.
Yes, sir. Randall.
I want to agree, right? Absolutely. We find that the Ethiopian church is the oldest established church in the world, right? So even before the church gets to Rome, Ethiopia had their own bishop, had their own episcopacy, and had their own Christianity. And when it comes to creating the canon, it was the Ethiopian church that preserved the books and brought the actual papyrus to the council so that they could evaluate it to be put in the canon. And when they canonized the scriptures, the Ethiopian church rejected the canonization, and their Bible to this day has 88 books, as opposed to the 66 that were canonized because they thought some should be included that were not included. So the Ethiopian church was doing theology way before the transatlantic slave trade. I got to tell this one story, and then I give it up to somebody else. Joanne Terrell, who is a student of James Cone. James Cone is the father of Black liberation theology, and he is deceased now. And so all the stories about him just kind of live in history now and are great stories. She tells the story of one day walking with James Cone down a street in New York. And she could tell he was in deep thought. It looked like he was in deep theological reflection, right? And so she looks at him and he looks at her and he goes, "You know what, Joanne?" And she's thinking he's about to drop something major, just something heavy, right here on her heart. And she says, Cone looked at her and said, "Joanne, why don't Black people ever take shit back to the stove?" And what Joanne said she realized was that it was a major theological thought that he was having. White Christianity has given us some bullshit, and it's our job to take it back to the store and say, this ain't good for none of us. This don't fit. This has got to go. I'm returning it. And so that's what we need to do, because if we look at the authenticity of Christianity, we'll realize that it was shaped in that fertile Mesopotamian crescent and in North Africa. So that's my.
Well deserved, my friend. Well deserved. Listen, we haven't heard from Grayson or Nikki, and I would love to hear just what is it like to hear this and really process this as a white person who follows Jesus and is in community with Black people. What is that like, Nikki?
Whew. You had to go to me first. So I am very pro Black people choosing what they're going to do about their own faith and spiritual journeys. That's where I am. As I'm sitting here listening to you all talk, I find myself in grief. And I think it's because a really important part for me in this whole journey, thank you, Cody, really important part for me in this whole journey of decolonizing my raising and my faith and working toward a holistic reconciliation has been to grieved the things that were taken from me. And I've lost so much in my own understanding of the faith that I claim, because I have missed that part of my education about the origins of Black people starting this faith. And I also find myself in deep, deep grief because of what it has taken from the Black community. That it's like a severing. There's a break. I can only imagine that for me, I think I would feel like something was just missing from me. And so that's what it is for me. It's just, there's a lot of grief right now.
Yeah, I appreciate your transparency right there, right? Like the understanding the magnitude of the relationships that we have, and thinking about how much we have to overcome to really live in community with each other because of a misunderstanding of history, and then trying to reframe it for ourselves, and then some of us going in different directions. We miss out on a lot. So I appreciate you sharing that. Grayson, what are your thoughts?
So I'm definitely with Nikki on all of that. And I want to reiterate I am pro Black people choosing whatever spiritual path they want. I think especially using the word should, there's almost a moral component to that. At least that's what I've learned in my own self-talk. Like there's the phrase, you're shoulding on yourself. Like, oh, I should go to bed earlier. I should not be feeling this way. And there's a reason why, because there's like a moral component to it. And so that question coming from me and Nikki has a different resonance than it coming from Karima, Stephen, Christian, or Myron, or any other person of color or Black person. So yeah, for me, it's like, do whatever, leads you to the divine, leads you to yourself, reclaims the self, that whiteianity as, who called it that? Whiteianity. I forget. I think it might be Pamela Lightsey, womanist scholar. But whatever whiteianity sought to steal from you. And if that is Christianity, then great. I probably have something to learn from you as to what authentic Christianity actually is, and authentic spirituality, and not just the drag show of spirituality that white people have been putting on for 400 years. But if it is Islam, if it is just spirituality, if it is indigenous African spiritualities, of which Tierney rightly noted in the comments, Christianity is one, then yeah, like I'm for that. I also appreciate the history lesson, because while y'all were talking, I was frantically searching through my church history notes, like, oh, who was that guy that said this thing? And then Stephen and Myron laid it all out. So I appreciate the reminder, because it's true. We owe a lot of our doctrines to particularly North African theologians, of whom Augustine is one. But I think, yeah, where my train of thought was going was very similar to what, Christian, you were talking about, that like white people, we don't need more credit than what we've already tried to take and assume for ourselves. Like we didn't invent it. We appropriated it. We, as we do pretty much everything. So it's essentially like saying, man, Eminem's really good at rap. He's the father of hip hop now. Or man, Macklemore had a bop. I think he's the father of hip hop now. And that ain't it. It's not to say Eminem and Macklemore aren't good, but because there's good white Christians, we're one of the good ones, but credit where it's due. And the last thing I'll say is I see it similar to saying that like homosexuality is a European thing. When in fact homophobia is a European thing. Like we don't need to give whiteness more of an ontology, which is like a grounding in reality and a source, because it's a lie and a fictitious imagination. But we also don't need to give them more power and credit, more power and credit than we already assume we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your analogy about Eminem is a great rapper, so now all of a sudden he's the father of hip hop. That is a perfect analogy of white Christianity, right? White Christians come in, and honestly, white Christianity isn't even a good representation of Christianity. At least with Eminem, he really is a great rapper. But we
in either case, you're going to lose yourself.
Oh, God. Fantastic. Yeah, you know, that's very important that we understand it from that perspective. Black people created hip hop. White people have come in and been impacted by it and have embraced the artistic expression, but that doesn't mean white people get to take credit for it. It's the same thing with Christianity. But because we're so deep into the history, we have to look back so much further to understand the implications of how white people appropriated Christianity. I see Josh Carpenter in the comments. He said Martin Luther and John Calvin are the Eminem and Macklemore of Christian history.
I'm gonna need somebody to do that PhD.
Not me, not me.
Yeah, that would be a good one. So I want to go back to Steve in a second, but I also want to say this. I believe that Black people should not practice any expression of faith that requires us to define ourselves in opposition to others, right? White Christianity requires us to define ourselves in opposition to others. And my concern for Black people is that as we are awakened to the damages that whitewash theology and whitewash Christianity has caused us, my concern is that we will start practicing and have started practicing other Black, like centric faith expressions that do the same stuff white Christianity did. So it's just another form of white Christianity, because we'll practice the same oppression, the same patriarchy, the same homophobia, but we'll root it in Blackness. And I think that's a major issue that we have to consider with expressing our faith and determining, do we want to be a Christian or not? And Steve, if you could kind of shed some light on that, like what are the challenges or the cons to Black people leaving Christianity and practicing other faiths, or do you think there are any?
I'm a little bit liberal, and I'm open to people kind of stretching out. Here's my like quick synopsis of it. I think that we all ultimately serve the same God, but call him different names. So if you want to call it something else or walk that path a different way at a different speed, I'm totally cool with that. But I do agree with the point that you just made. Anytime we start some new path, we have to be cautious and careful that we don't then put ourselves in place of the oppressor and oppress other people in our quest to gain this freedom in our religious expression.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think that's a shift from the ancestors within our faith tradition and the scriptures, like going back to the Hebrew Bible, which we know as the Old Testament. Like they believed that there were multiple gods, but our God is the greatest of all the gods, right? King of kings, Lord of lords, which means there are other kings and there are other lords, but our king is the greatest king and our Lord is the greatest Lord. And now we've shifted in our culture to where many of us don't view it that way. And I think that's an important concept that we need to drill down because a lot of people don't consider that. Grayson, you gonna say something?
Yeah, just to add on, it's the difference between monolatry and monotheism. So monolatry is what you're talking about, Christian, where there are multiple gods, but ours is like the biggest or the best. And then monotheism is there's only one God, period.
Yes, sir. Myron, you have any thoughts on that? Like the challenges with Black people practicing other faith expressions, and what are the caveats there? What are the dangers? What do you think?
So first off, I think we need to remember that Christianity is an experiential religion from the beginning. The way people come to Jesus and to Christ is through an experience with him. We see it all throughout the Gospels. They meet him and then they become converted. Those famous words in John 3, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, yada, 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 you know the rest of it, is in an experiential meeting that Jesus is having with an individual, right? It's all experiential. So if you haven't had an experience and you have not been converted by that experience, I don't expect you to be Christian. I don't necessarily believe in faith that is passed down or faith that is inherited. I think that faith has to be substantiated with your own experience. I'm a true out Protestant, right? In the Baptist church, you come based on your own belief system, right? You get baptized because you believe, not because mama or daddy believe. So go ahead and practice what you want. Now, I believe my experience with Jesus has caused me to be Christian. But your experience is what's going to cause you to follow the faith that you choose. Y'all are too kind with these mics here today. This is all right.
Bringing it.
Hey, and when you add on the fact that Christianity was just kind of like plagiarized from other people's stuff, it all kind of like works out. But that's another conversation for another day.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of plagiarism, right? Even in the ancient Israelite faith, there was plagiarism in the prehistoric writings of Genesis 1 through 11. You know, when we look at the story of Noah and how we compare it to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which precedes the writing of the story of Noah, but it's a parallel story. There's like humans over time have borrowed from each other. That's just what happens. The problem, and that's not a problem. The problem is when we borrow something and try to take credit for its creation.
Exactly.
That's where we get into trouble. Yeah. Karima, you have any thoughts? Because, you know, you're somebody who, like, you know, Christianity, you grew up in the evangelical church, and now you're kind of fluid. What are your thoughts?
I am. And it's really, you know, what Stephen said. I am at this place where for so long I was told what I couldn't do, what was wrong to read, what was wrong to learn about, what was wrong to practice. When in fact, the truth was that these other practices, Christianity could be a part of these other practices. And so now I am in this exploratory state where I want to learn what these other, what do we call them, African ancestral spiritual traditions are. Not necessarily that I want to adopt them, but for so long they were hidden from my view, hidden from me. It was forbidden even for me to even inquire of them. And so I feel like I was at a disservice. I feel like I've given my children a disservice because, you know, I raised some good evangelical kids. And so now that they are teenagers and young adults and they are beginning to, you know, ask questions, and I'm telling them, I told you what I told you because at that time, that's what I knew to be true. Now I speak unto you a new thing. And that thing that I say to you now is explore for yourself. I agree with you, Stephen, that there is one God and there are many expressions of that God. And there are many ways that people have relationship with that God. And yes, come to that on your own. This is what Mama has practiced. Now you need to be right yourself, and whatever that expression is. I support their discovery and their selecting of whatever that is, and knowing that may change. So I'm exploring it all. Like I got girlfriends talking about, girl, you got to set up your altar. And I was like, okay, I know how to set up one from the Old Testament. I don't know which kind you talk about. I need some chicken bones or something. Like what do I need to do? So all of that is, I'm enjoying learning it and stretching my boundaries. This is an excellent conversation.
Yeah. Now I appreciate you saying that. And I actually want to ask Steve something real quick, because we bring up this concept of, you know, we believe that there's one God and many expressions of that God within creation, and many faith traditions that seem to all point to that same God. And, you know, we hear Karima talking about exploring, you know, different forms of African spirituality. Well, what do we do with the text where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father but by me? What do we do with that, Steve?
Did Jesus say that, or did the people who went in and edited the biblical text for purposes of power and control, put words in Jesus's mouth to perpetuate the doctrine, the theology, the lens that they wanted the people underneath them to follow. That's where I'm hung up on, us kind of getting hung up on that particular text. Revisionist history it's there within the biblical text and within the Christian faith. You know, just like the walls of Jericho come tumbling down, innocent women and children are killed in the name of God. Like, let's stop the bullshit. A lot of shit was made up, and it was just done for power control and to create one's own narrative to support one's own thought process and belief.
Well, all right then. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Grayson, go ahead.
I first just want to ask Stephen, do you listen to Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, he's saying revisionist history a lot. Are we sponsored by them now? Very good podcast, though. Yeah, I think, too, it could be looked at. I agree with what Stephen's saying. But it could be looked at that, like, if the Father is this one expression of God, then could it not be that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life to that expression of God? You arrive at God through this version of God, through this particular path, in a very similar way that, like, I can only share that experience of God that I myself have had as an expression of God bearing God's image. So, like, how I relate to God, you will experience that version through me in a way that only I can offer. But that doesn't mean that the expression of God that Stephen offers or Karima offers is invalid. They are just the way, the truth, and the life to that expression of God as they understand it and embody it.
Yeah, Grayson, if we all put Christian's address in our mapping system on our phones right now, it would all give us different routes to the same destination. That's
right. I could take 285 and take 80 minutes, or I could take 85 and take 75 minutes.
That is a very good point.
You know, I read the text a little bit differently. So I think it is Jesus making a statement of divinity about himself, saying that he is God, and so he's the head of the household. So what he's suggesting is that you can try any other method or methodology, but it's going to come to me in the end because I'm God. And so I think that's the statement that Jesus is making, right? Which is why they want to kill him. He was up there saying, I'm God. He was making these Christological statements. So I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think what Jesus is doing is he's reestablishing the order and saying, you thought I was just a created thing, but I'm here to tell you that I'm the creator. And so all the methodologies you're using to get to God is going to end up at me.
I love this. I love this kind of conversation because I look at it. I subscribe to what each of you said. I also look at it differently. I believe when Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," I'm gonna operate on the assumption that Jesus actually said it, right? And that's not to negate the possibility that it's revisionist history. But if I operate from the assumption that Jesus actually said it, I look at Jesus as our standard just as much as I look at Jesus as our savior. So when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I believe Jesus is saying, hey, look at me. Look at the way that I move. Look at the way that I treat people. That's the way, right? Look at the truth that I speak. That's the truth. Look at the life that I live. That's the life. And when you get with my way, even if you don't know my name, if you follow my way, because there are different faith traditions that follow the way of Jesus without ever declaring his name. I believe anybody that follows the way of Jesus, that is the way to God, the way of love and compassion and care and kindness and justice and affirmation and liberation. I believe in my heart of hearts, that is the way to God.
And
I got one. Look at that. Go ahead, Grayson.
And I will say, though, to keep it within the subject, while there are many ways to Jesus, I believe those ways have to be hallmarked by truth and life. And the white Christianity cannot be the way to Jesus because within it there is neither truth nor life.
Yes. Yes.
I'd also like to point out that's why Christian Smith is a better preacher than me. Did y'all hear those 3 points? And then he concluded with a poem. Wasn't that beautiful? I mean, one of these days I'm gonna be so gifted. And he's right here on the podcast. You would like to.
Hey, Christian, your mom asked a good question a second ago. Yes. So I was throwing that out there for contemplation and consideration, just to add some flavor to the context of our conversation. I do believe that Jesus said it, but I wanted to throw a little extra in there just for the point of pontification, that we might explore some other ideologies and ideas. But yeah, I do believe. All right, which word? Which word? Pontification?
Pontification. Yes.
Oh,
I knew that was
valid. That was valid.
You've been on the edge of glory the whole time.
I tried to skate past. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's not like all my relationships, on the edge of glory. It's never great.
On the edge of glory.
Yep. Nikki, anything you would add there on Jesus, the way, the truth, and like how that plays into this conversation?
I don't know that it adds. I really connected very much with what Myron talked about with Christianity as an experiential faith, and it has been from the very beginning. And I also connected a lot with what you said about how when you connect with that way, that truth, and that life, then you will be with me. Yeah. And so I know that in my own experience, I have connected with that way, that truth, and that life with a Hindu professor that prayed on 9/11 because I was in India when it happened. And he helped usher me into the presence of God. And I know that when I have sat and talked with my friend who practices Wicca, I hear echoes of my own experience with Jesus when she talks about celebrating the Sabbats. And so I know that these things are true. I can't separate them from my experience any more than I can walk around without breathing. I know that it's true. So, So is there one God and many paths to that God? Are there a whole bunch of gods and we all kind of get to one of them? Do we all come together and really the God is the connections in between us? I don't know. But I do know what I experienced. And Myron, I really connected with what you said there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. But Creamer, before we go back to Steve for our final thoughts, what do you want to share?
This has been so rich. Oh my goodness. Like this needs to be broadcast around the world somehow. What you said, Christian, and what all of you have really echoed, the fact that when we follow the way of Jesus, that leads to, what universally those who believe in God, higher power, source, energy, whatever you want to call it, the characteristics are still the same. And so, what I see Jesus doing is simply expressing in a human factor what this entity is. And I agree with you, Nikki, when I engage, as I now can, right, outside of that oppressive doctrine, when I now engage with people of different faiths, I see that. I see the compassion, the kindness, the forgiveness, the grace, the mercy, the justice, in all of these different expressions. And I can align with that. That is something that I can align with. So, Christian, I agree with you. That is what I'm explaining to my children, is how they can reconcile what they have heard all of their life to what now they are seeing as another possible experience.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Steve, take like the last 90 seconds or so and just give us your thoughts, because you shared so many great things. And there are some comments also from our live virtual audience that I'd like for us to unpack, and the after party, the bonus content
Cool.
But Steve, go ahead and share some final thoughts for our listeners on the podcast platform.
For sure, man. Listen, I got to thank Dr. Lloyd Allen there at McAfee, because I hated church history while I was there. I didn't see its relevance in the Black church experience. Oh, but how it so helped me on Facebook and in conversations like these with people. So let me close out with another point of history that ties back into this question that many people will have of should Black people be Christians. In 632 CE, as a result of the Arab invasions, Christianity was under siege in North Africa. And so Egypt transformed from a predominantly Christian country to a Muslim country. And as a result of the gospel of Islam and the Arab conquest of North Africa, Christianity began to almost exclusively thrive on the continent of Europe from the 7th century onward. And this leads many people to solely identify Christianity with Europe. And again, this is what led to the misconception that has persisted that Christianity is the white man's religion and that the spread of Christianity in Africa is the exclusive result of modern European missionary work. I want us to have a full picture of how we got to this place of thinking that Christianity is the white man's religion, and it's not. Africa actually civilized Europe.
Mic drop. You got to give him a mic drop, Dad. That's why I love this guy. Steve, you'll definitely be back.
Thank y'all.
We're gonna continue this with our live virtual audience, but thank you everybody for your thoughtful insight today. Even as we've processed some things on the spot, a lot of this wasn't pre-planned, but we've had to work through some stuff here. We're gonna come back next time with our episode on pro-ho theology. So Tierney AT&T Jordan, one of our producers and our subject matter expert on womanist theology, is going to be our special guest. So we can't wait to get into that one. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for watching. I'm Christian A. Smith, the Heretic. This is Holy Smoke, Cigars and Spirituality. We'll see you next time.